want to start here with the latest update on Kansas basketball. And the update is that there is no update. Kansas basketball is right now in the transfer portal searching for their final piece, and that piece continues to elude them. Last week, we talked about the miss on Dame Sarr and then on Darian Williams. We are recording on Wednesday afternoon, which Wednesday today, May 28th, is the final day for college players to withdraw from the NBA draft or essentially stay in the NBA draft. A couple of notes there from the Kansas perspective, which is there were no players from Kansas that were in the NBA draft or that were going. Technically, Melvin Council was in, but he already announced he officially, I guess, withdrew about a week or so ago. But in terms of names that could be to watch for Kansas that you can cross off, two guys that I think you and I had talked about a little bit. RJ Lewis is a guy that I think Kansas looked at early on in the process and kind of decided they were going to go a different direction from St. John's. He stayed in the draft. Jameer Watkins from Florida State also stayed in the draft. Probably was going to be out of KU's price range, I think, regardless if he did come back. Obviously, PJ Haggerty committed to K-State. He was another name that was in the mix, I think, when you talk about him and Darian Williams. He ends up going to Manhattan, which, bleh. Rakeem Passmore committed to Maryland a couple days ago. Earlier in the day today on Wednesday, Tyon Grant Foster committed to Gonzaga. So long story short, there are not very many options left for Kansas in the transfer portal. And again, this was sort of the last chance for maybe any, I guess, surprise names to withdraw from the NBA draft. So those guys that did not do so, you can cross them off the list. They are in the NBA draft, not coming back to college. So increasingly, Kevin, it would seem as though KU was going to be looking internationally to fill out presumably a final starting spot on their roster when you look at kind of that wing position. And obviously they are still in the hunt for a rotational big man as well. They typically have 3 spots available, so you could be talking about adding another player as well. But it looks like you're looking international at this point. Obviously, Pat Sumnick visited Kansas a couple weeks ago. No commitment yet on that front, but that's kind of where things stand, I guess, right now for Kansas basketball.
Yeah, and there are a couple interesting pieces out there from an international perspective, guys that, would project potentially as, say, NBA draft second-round picks if they were to come out that are still out there. And so I think that's probably where that next piece is going to be looking. You're going to be looking at, like you said. Remember, Kansas added Johnny Furphy in August. I know we've said it before, but that was one that came down a lot later. Of course, if you're Kansas, you're in this current roster spot. You don't want to wait until August with that level of uncertainty. If you add a guy in August, you'd like it to be somebody that, hey, you've already got kind of your rotation that you feel good about, and you're adding somebody to that. I think at this point, if Kansas were to roll into the season with the starting 5 that they would have today, I wouldn't necessarily dislike it, Nick, because I don't think it's a bad group. I think when you look at Darren Peterson, obviously being probably one of the best guards in America, when you look at Flory Badunga potentially being a first round pick, especially with the type of time and opportunities that he's going to get this year, those are 2 pretty good spots. And you look at Jaden Dawson adding shooting. You look at Melvin Council, a guy that I think was probably going to start or have a great chance to start regardless, is going to be in that group. Your 4 at this point is probably going to be like Trey White, and we've talked about him and how he fits in with that group. I do think if you could go out and land a high-level 2-3, whether that's an international guy, whether that's a high school guy who decides to class up or whatever you're thinking in that situation, or whatever your opportunities are, I wouldn't have an issue with that. We've talked about it before where I really like Jaden Dawson as sort of your 6th man. We keep bringing up Curtis Jones because I think that's an interesting comp for him, but the Remy Martin role, basically somebody who comes off that bench, gives you some firepower, and I think he's really well suited for that. If he is as a starter, Curtis Jones was a good starter too. Like it's not like he would be a bad starter, but I really like that if you have somebody that you feel really good about. Of course, the big wild card, or the wild cards, I guess, in both of these are a pair of guys coming off injury. If Bryson Tiller, is healthy and is able to play up to his potential, obviously that helps quite a bit. And then Elmarko Jackson as well, being a guy that you started to really hear positive things about after last season. And then, of course, you have the Achilles injury. It's unclear what to expect there. But those are two guys that, hey, if they come in and play well, it gives you maybe a little bit more ceiling than you're thinking. But I do think, Nick, they're obviously going to fill out the roster. And so you're going to have maybe a piece or two in there that it's like, hey, I'm not super excited about this backup big man, like you said. But they still need a backup big man. I think the other part of it, though, is they still could use somebody maybe with some upside, especially in that sort of 2-3 group, I think, to plug into that group and maybe give them a little bit more firepower. And if they were able to do that, I think I would feel a little bit better about them as a top 10, top 15 type team. I know people are sitting here like bumming out and everything about where they're at. Last I checked on Bart Torvik, I think KU's like 16th. So like it's not that it's, a disaster at this point, but also if you want Kansas to take advantage of the Darren Peterson year and really have a chance to make a run at a national title, you're probably still a few pieces away, especially potentially even somebody in that starting lineup.
Yes, it was very much doom and gloom vibes last week, and understandably so. But you and I have talked about this, and I want to reiterate it very clearly here. Kansas's transfer portal class overall in a bubble, I think, looks really good. Like in terms of the fit of players that you went out and got, Melvin Council, I think, is going to be a really talented player. You just mentioned Jaden Dawson and what he could potentially bring, no matter what his role is, plus Trey White. Like that's a really solid transfer portal class of guys that I think fit well into the KU culture, KU program, whatever it may be. It's just that, like we talked about with the misses on Darian Williams and Dame Sarr, is that when you set yourself up where you do need to go out and get that many transfers and you have this presumed starting spot and you are unable to land sort of that top guy, it leaves you feeling a bit empty. And You're right. Kansas, very much so, I think, when you look at this roster right now, is probably a top 20 team in the country, probably in that, top 15 to top 25 range. The issue is that you had a chance to be a top 5 team, top 10 team, if you add in Darian Williams.
Just not number one, right?
Exactly. Just not number one. Just please do not put KU number one, which obviously that shouldn't be an issue now. But yeah, that kind of ties into a comment that we had on our YouTube channel, which again, thank you so much for those of you that comment. This was a YouTube commenter that basically brought up the question of, I think I made a comment on our last show after the Darian Williams commitment to NC State about how Kansas sort of set themselves up for the situation by wanting to go for a full rebuild and cleaning house, for lack of a better term. And we had a YouTube comment basically asking about that and suggesting, is this a position KU wanted to be in, right? I mean, when you think about guys like AJ Storr, Rylan Griffin, Ricky's Passmore, like were those guys pushed out by KU? Did they want to leave? I think probably it's still a bit of a gray area. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Kevin. I mean, I think Ricky's Passmore is a great example of a player that probably KU absolutely would have preferred to keep, but it just didn't work out, right? But I mean, you think about AJ Storr, Rylan Griffin, like guys that obviously have really disappointing seasons at KU. You do have to wonder if there was a bit of a mutual decision there of both sides saying, hey, maybe it's best we go separate ways, right? And that has left KU in this particular situation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Nick. I think it is a little bit of both, where you probably have, I'm not sure Kansas, was retaining AJ Storr. I'm not sure was super high on the priority list for Kansas this offseason. I don't think Kansas wanted Ricky's Passmore to walk. And if they did, quite frankly, Nick, I think that was probably a mistake, because I think that when you look at what we've talked about all season long, Bill Self does his best when he has continuity, when he can develop guys over time and sort of break guys down and build them back up into really good basketball players. And when you look at sort of the model of the types of guys he's had success with, it's Ricky's Passmore, right? Like athletic guys that play hard. And hey, we can fill in the blanks and the little, the areas that are maybe a little rough around the edges, we can polish those up. And so I think that there is probably a little bit of both, where maybe there was a guy or two that you didn't want to go that wound up going, and there was maybe a guy or two that you're like, hey, I'm not super upset to see you go at this point. And so I think it's a little bit of both. I don't know that KU wanted the entire tear down and rebuild. Remember, I feel like we bring this up every show, Flory heading the portal, right? Like they didn't want Flory to go, but it was a situation where based on what had happened last year and everything else, Flory was going to go out and exercise his options and look at it. And so Kansas was able to bring Flory back. But I certainly think when we were sitting here on the show talking about, hey, what if Flory doesn't come back? That wasn't a situation the KU staff was thinking when they were thinking, hey, let's rebuild this thing, was, hey, let's get rid of Flory. And so I do think that there was probably a little bit of both in all of that, where there were probably a few guys that they were okay with, them moving on and trying to find other guys. And the flip side of it is they probably lost a guy or two, and, maybe even, maybe even extended a little more for Flory than they would have liked to bring him back. And so I do think that it was a little bit of both.
The other thing I'll add is there's just so much smoke and mirrors throughout this process of back channeling, of, he said, like, oh, good riddance. This program wanted this guy gone. Oh, actually they wanted him back. Oh, it's a little bit of everything. And that kind of fuels the fire, I think, of some cases. But yeah, I think you're right. In this case, obviously the mentality, I think, for KU coming into this offseason was, we need to build a team around Darren Peterson.
Sure.
And that has been the mentality, I think, this whole offseason. And again, some of those guys that were previously on the roster that ended up leaving, maybe Kansas felt they were a part of it. Maybe they felt they weren't, but that's just how the dice roll sometimes. I think, as you said, Flory is a great example of a guy that Kansas certainly expected to be in the fold and then really had to scramble when it seemed like maybe there was a potential he might not be. You think about it, like, if Flory is solidly in the fold and that doesn't happen, is there more of an opportunity there for Kansas to pivot to keep Marquise Passmore in the fold? Like, you just never know. The dominoes fall in so many different directions.